One move, and you join him. You picked the wrong day to test me.
The Grayson estate didn't just overlook the city, it ruled it. Its towering glass walls reflected the skyline, a silent display of wealth and power. A long, spotless driveway led to the entrance, guarded by men in black suits who never smiled. Inside, beneath gleaming chandeliers and cold marble floors, the air was heavy with more than just money, obligation, control, expectation. Nathaniel Nate Grayson had never known freedom, only the weight of a future decided for him before he was even born. He was 17, the son of Derek Grayson, a corporate giant with influence in everything that mattered. His mother, Eleanor, came from old money, a woman of unshakable poise who cared more about appearances than affection. His younger brother, Samuel, was the obedient one, the perfect son who fit their expectations without question. And Nate, he was a problem to be fixed. At the long dining table, his father's voice broke the silence, calm, firm, and in control. Your internship at Whitmore and Finch starts in June, Derek said, cutting into his steak with precise movements. You will treat it as the first step toward something greater. Nate barely looked up. I never agreed to that. Silence. 14-year-old Samuel kept his head down, suddenly focused on his plate. Their mother set her wine glass down with practiced elegance, tapping the rim with her manicured nails, a habit she had when she was irritated. Nathaniel, Eleanor said, her voice smooth, calculated. We don't expect you to agree. We expect you to comply. It wasn't a request. It never was. Nate tightened his grip on his fork. How many years had he swallowed his own words just to keep the peace? His father always said that power belonged to those who set the rules, not to those who pleaded for a say in the matter. But tonight, something inside him broke. And what if I don't? Nate asked, his voice calm but sharp. What if I don't want to be a politician, or a CEO, or whatever future you've planned for me? Derek didn't even hesitate. He simply looked through him as he took another bite of steak. You have no choice but to obey. Samuel flinched. Their mother sighed, as if the conversation was tedious. You were born into power, Nathaniel, she said with a hollow smile. And without it, you're nothing. A cold feeling settled in Nate's chest. They didn't see him as a son. They saw him as an asset. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping against the marble floor. Then maybe it's time I stop playing by your rules. For the first time, Derek lifted his gaze, sharp, calculating. And what rules do you think you can play by? Nate let out a slow breath, a smirk forming on his lips. Ones I make myself. He turned to leave, but his father's voice followed him, low and cutting. Tell me, Nathaniel, how exactly do you plan to fund this little rebellion of yours? Nate stopped but didn't turn around. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Derek exhaled, amused. You've never worked a day in your life. You have no money, no resources, and no clue how the world works outside this house. Walk away all you want, but you'll come crawling back the moment you realize power isn't something you can just take. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of Nate's lips. He finally turned his head just enough to glance over his shoulder, but instead of answering, he simply walked upstairs. Now wasn't the time for a reckless move. He needed a real plan. 2 weeks later, the halls of Harrington Academy were filled with the privileged and the powerful, the children of senators, billionaires, and industry leaders. For years, Nate had played his part, the quiet but sharp observer. He had connections, influence, and a last name that turned heads. But respect had to be earned. And in high school, respect belonged to those who took it. The school had its own hierarchy. At the top stood Ryan Carter, the golden boy, 6'2", football team captain, son of a real estate mogul. Charismatic, ruthless, and smart enough to know that power wasn't just about throwing punches, it was about control. And right now, Nate was in his sights. It happened fast. The moment Nate stepped through the back entrance, he knew. The subtle shift in the air, the unnatural quiet, the way students near the lockers pretended not to look. An ambush. Before he could react, 4 guys stepped in, trapping him. Ryan stood at the center, arms crossed, smirking like a king surveying his court. You think you're better than us, Grayson? His voice was casual, almost bored, but his intent was clear. Walking around like you own the place, like your name actually means something. Nate held his ground. It does mean something. That's why you're wasting your time with this little stunt. Ryan's smirk widened. You talk big for someone who's outnumbered. Nate didn't bother looking at the 4 guys surrounding him. Numbers only mattered in a fight. And this wasn't about fists. This was about perception. Ryan wasn't here to beat him up. He was here to make a statement, which meant Nate still had room to maneuver. Luke, one of Ryan's guys stepped forward, grabbing Nate's shirt and slamming him against the wall. Nate exhaled sharply but didn't resist. Fighting was for idiots. Power wasn't about who threw the hardest punch, it was about who controlled the board. And Nate was already making his first move. Ryan stepped in closer, voice dropping. "You're nothing without your last name, and I think it's about time you learn where you really stand." A nod. Luke pulled out his phone, the red recording light glaring in Nate's face. Live. So that was the game. Nate understood immediately. Ryan wasn't after pain, he was after humiliation. Public ruin. Bruises faded. A viral video was forever. Ryan took another step forward, his presence suffocating. "Kneel." The word echoed, louder than it should have. The guys flanking Nate shifted, waiting. Even the students pretending not to watch had stopped pretending. A slow silence settled between them. Then, Nate smiled. Not forced, not nervous, just amused. He glanced at Luke's phone, then back to Ryan, shaking his head. "You really want to do this on camera?" Ryan barely blinked. "I told you to kneel." Nate exhaled through his nose, almost like a laugh. He leaned in slightly. "You think I'd kneel for someone who needs 4 guys to hold me down?" His voice was calm, collected, and that made it worse. Ryan's expression flickered, just for a second. A crack in the facade. Doubt. Luke hesitated. So did the others. Nate saw his opening. Control was slipping through their fingers, and he was about to make them give it to him. Nate didn't need fists. He needed leverage, and he had it. Everyone had a secret, so he laughed, a quiet, dismissive sound. Shaking his head, he looked directly at the phone recording him and said, "You really want me to talk about why your dad's company is being investigated for fraud? Right here, on camera." Silence. Luke hesitated, his grip on the phone shifting slightly. The other guys exchanged quick glances. Ryan's smirk vanished. His jaw tightened, but his eyes, those gave him away. "What the hell are you talking about?" Ryan's voice wasn't as sharp this time. It was testing, calculating. Nate tilted his head, keeping his tone casual. "You should ask your old man, or, you know, the SEC. I hear they're very interested in offshore accounts these days." Ryan's nostrils flared. He grabbed Nate's shirt, but this time, it wasn't with confidence. It was with panic. "Shut up." Nate didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough so that only Ryan could hear. "You don't even know, do you?" Ryan's fingers twitched against the fabric of Nate's shirt. That was it. The hesitation, the moment of doubt. He was afraid. Nate smiled. "Make me." Ryan's grip loosened. His eyes flicked to his crew, Luke, Brandon, Tyler. They were watching, waiting. If Ryan looked weak now, he wouldn't just lose to Nate, he'd lose them, and he knew it. Slowly, his fingers uncurled from Nate's shirt, but the damage was already done. Luke stepped back first, clearing his throat. Brandon followed, shifting uncomfortably. Tyler glanced between them, then at Ryan, waiting for him to fix the situation. Ryan shoved Nate away, his jaw clenched. "This isn't over." Nate adjusted his shirt like he had all the time in the world. "Oh, it is." He met Ryan's gaze, steady and unshaken. "You just don't know it yet." Ryan stormed off, his guys trailing behind him. But Nate saw it. The way they hesitated. The way they didn't walk as close to Ryan as before. They weren't sure anymore. And that was the first crack in Ryan's empire. He wasn't the prey anymore. He was the predator. And this was only the beginning. The shift in power wasn't immediate. It never was. It started with whispers, stolen glances, conversations that stopped the moment Nate walked by. Ryan Carter wasn't the king anymore. And that made people nervous. Nate had broken him without throwing a single punch. And the school had noticed. At first, nothing changed. Ryan still walked the halls like he owned them. His guys still flanked him, still laughed a little too loud, still tried to act like nothing had happened. But power wasn't about what people said. It was about what they believed. And slowly, the cracks started to show. Students who once avoided Nate now watched him. Some with curiosity, some with caution, some with something close to respect. By the 3rd day, Ryan wasn't laughing as much. By the 5th, he was avoiding eye contact. By the 7th, he wasn't walking with his crew all the time. That's when the first one came to him. The first recruit. It was between classes when Nate found a freshman hovering near his locker. Thin, nervous. The type who kept his head down and moved through the school like a ghost. Oliver King. Nate shut his locker, looking him over. "You lost." Oliver hesitated, glancing around. "No, I just..." He took a breath. "I heard what you did to Ryan." Nate leaned against the lockers. "What did you hear?" Oliver swallowed. "That you flipped the script, made him back down." His voice lowered. "People like me, we don't get chances like that." Nate studied him. A kid who had been stepped on his whole life. Someone who saw what Nate had done and thought, maybe, just maybe, there's another way. "You looking for protection?" Nate asked. Oliver's shoulders stiffened. "No." His voice was firmer this time. "I'm looking for something bigger." Nate smiled. He wasn't the only one tired of the rules. By the end of the week, Others had followed. Not muscle, brains, influence. People who understood that power wasn't about size, it was about leverage. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in steps, pieces moving into place. Oliver King was first. A tech genius, quiet but observant. The kind of guy who could dig up dirt without ever being seen. Then came Damon Hayes. A strategist, good with numbers, saw patterns others didn't. He wasn't just smart, he was calculated. Next was Sophia Lane, Ryan's ex-girlfriend, sharp and ruthless, who knew all his weaknesses. And finally, Marcus Reed, a rich kid with an edge. His family had connections Nate could use. They weren't friends, they were assets. And Nate, he was the architect. The first time they met in secret, gathered in an empty classroom after hours, he looked each of them in the eye and said, "We don't fight battles, we end them before they start." And from that moment on, Harrington Academy started to shift. Not all at once, not completely, but piece by piece, move by move. It was becoming his. Few days later, in the cafeteria, Nate noticed something off for the first time. He was sitting in the cafeteria, watching the pieces of his empire fall into place. Oliver was feeding him information. Damon was handling finances. Sophia was planting rumors. Everything was running smoothly. Too smoothly. Then, he saw the security cameras. 2 were dead. They hung in the corners of the cafeteria, little red lights blinking. A silent, constant presence. But today, dark, dead. Nate frowned. A malfunction. Or maybe a system reset. No, it's too convenient. Too specific. His gut tightened. He nudged Oliver, keeping his voice low. "Check the school's network. I want to know if the security system's been tampered with." Oliver frowned but nodded. On it, he reached for his laptop. And then, the cafeteria doors swung open. Mr. Daniels, the head of school security, strode in like a storm. An ex-cop, built like a tank, always had a Glock on his hip, and he looked pissed. His gaze swept the room, sharp and assessing. "Nobody leaves," he barked, his voice slicing through the cafeteria's usual noise. "Security breach. Everyone stays put until we figure it out." Tension hit fast. Conversations dropped to whispers. A few students exchanged uneasy glances. Nate leaned back in his chair, keeping his expression neutral, but his mind was already racing. A security breach. That wasn't normal. Not at Harrington Academy. His eyes flicked to Oliver's laptop. Had someone already tampered with the system before they could check it? Across the room, Ryan Carter was watching. Nate met his gaze. The warning bells rang through Harrington Academy. Shrill, deafening, urgent. At first, no one reacted. Then, boom. The explosion ripped through the west wing. A gut-punching shockwave slammed into the cafeteria. Windows shattered, glass spraying like shrapnel. Tables rattled. The floor trembled beneath them. For a second, there was only silence, the stunned, frozen kind. Then, screams. Trays hit the floor. Students scrambled out of their seats. Some ran, others ducked. A girl tripped, knocking over a chair. Panic swallowed the room whole. Nate flinched. The blast had hit harder than he expected. His ears rang. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs. Security should have been all over this already. Where the hell were they? He grabbed Oliver's arm, yanking him down behind a table. "Get me security feeds, now." Oliver, shaking, fumbled with his laptop. "They're all offline. Someone took out the system before the blast." Nate's stomach tightened. Someone had neutralized security before the attack even began. Across the cafeteria, students bolted for the exits. A few made it to the doors. Then they burst open. Men in black tactical gear stormed in, armed, masks covering their faces. They moved with military precision. No hesitation, no mercy. A deep, cold voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Everyone on the ground, now." And just like that, Harrington Academy belonged to them. Harrington Academy had never felt this small. The cafeteria, once filled with loud, careless conversations, was now a tomb of silence. Only the sound of shaky breathing, quiet sobs, and the crunch of glass under heavy boots filled the air. The scent of burnt metal and dust clung to the room, mixing with the faint, metallic tang of blood. Somewhere across the floor, a girl whimpered. A chair scraped as someone shifted, then froze. The terrorists moved with precision, efficient, composed, utterly in control. Every action was deliberate. Every movement calculated. There was no panic, no wasted threats, only dominance. And Nate, he was watching, calculating. How many men? How well armed? Who was in charge? Beside him, Ryan Carter knelt, head low, shoulders tight, his once dominant presence shrinking under the weight of something bigger than him. His crew, Brandon, Luke, Tyler, were just as lost. They weren't used to being the ones afraid, and Nate could feel it, the shift, the moment when power slips from one hand to another. The only question was, who would take it? A terrorist, a tall man, lean but built for violence, walked the aisle between them, scanning faces. A hunter surveying his prey. His rifle hung loose at his side, but that was the most terrifying part. he didn't even feel the need to keep it raised. That's how in control they were. Then, he pointed. You, Marcus Reed, the rich kid, the one who had always hidden behind money, behind bodyguards, behind privilege. None of that mattered now. The terrorist grabbed his collar, yanking him to his feet. Marcus let out a sharp breath, trying to resist, but the gun pressed to his ribs ended the thought fast. Move, the terrorist ordered. Marcus's eyes darted, wide with fear, searching for help, looking at Nate, and Nate knew. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was a test. The first chance to prove he was more than just a kid with a sharp mind, that he could be something dangerous, that he could be a threat. And in that moment, Nate made a decision. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to win. Wait. Nate's voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Clear, steady, controlled. The terrorist paused, turned, eyes locked onto him. Nate remained kneeling, hands still raised, but his face calm, calculating. What do you want with him? Nate asked, nodding toward Marcus. Whatever it is, I can do it better. The terrorist tilted his head. That's so. Nate nodded. You need someone useful. Someone who knows how things work here. He let the words settle. You're wasting your time with him. A flicker of hesitation. Marcus gasped softly, barely breathing. Ryan turned, staring at Nate like he'd lost his mind. Because what the hell was he doing? Nate could feel it. The gamble. If this worked, he controlled the board. If it didn't, he was next. The terrorist's grip on Marcus didn't loosen immediately. He studied Nate, weighing his words. Then, he let go. Marcus collapsed, sucking in air like he'd nearly drowned. The masked man knelt down. I level with Nate. And why should I believe you? Nate didn't flinch. Because if you kill me, you'll never know what I know. The terrorist chuckled. Then, without warning, he drove the butt of his rifle into Nate's stomach. Pain ripped through his ribs. Nate doubled over, gasping, his vision blurring for a second. But even through the pain, he was smiling. Because now, they saw him. He wasn't just another terrified student. He was a problem. And Ryan knew it too. Pain burned through Nate's ribs, sharp and unrelenting. His breath came in short gasps as he pressed a hand against the cold cafeteria floor, grounding himself. But he wasn't thinking about pain. He was thinking about control. The terrorist who had hit him, gone, moved on, because that's what they did. They hit, they threatened, but they didn't linger. Efficiency. And if there was one thing Nate understood, it was efficiency. Slowly, he lifted his head, his gaze sweeping the room. The people here weren't soldiers. They were chess pieces. His eyes flicked to Marcus, still trembling on the floor, arms wrapped around himself like he could disappear if he just stayed small enough. Weak, a pawn. Then to Ryan, the king without a throne. Ryan's jaw was clenched so tightly his teeth might crack. His fists were white-knuckled, the tendons in his arms taut, but he wasn't moving, not fighting, not leading, just kneeling. And Nate saw it, the frustration, the humiliation, and beneath it all, the fear. Not fear of the terrorists, not even fear of Nate, not yet, but fear of the truth settling into his bones. His strength didn't mean anything here, and men like Ryan Carter, they hated feeling powerless, and that was something Nate could use. A sudden crack shattered the tense silence, gunfire. Someone screamed, a teacher, a student, didn't matter. The cafeteria froze. The weight of the sound pressed down on every breath, every heartbeat. Outside, footsteps pounded against the floors, heavy, coordinated. More men, more weapons. The terrorists weren't just here to terrorize. They were locking the school down. Nate's mind worked fast. They weren't killing indiscriminately, not yet, which meant they needed something. Hostages, leverage, something bigger. Across from him, Ryan Carter was breathing hard. His chest rose and fell too quickly, like a fighter between rounds. Except this wasn't a fight he could win with his fists. His hands clenched, then unclenched. His knuckles were white, but he didn't move. Nate leaned closer, voice low, edged with something sharp. Still waiting to throw the first punch, Carter. Ryan's head snapped toward him, eyes burning with something between rage and realization. Shut up, Grayson. Nate smirked. That was good. That meant Ryan wasn't broken yet, but he was cracking. And when someone like Ryan Carter started cracking, that's when you could reshape them. The lead terrorist walked in, and everything changed. The others had moved with discipline, but this man, he moved with certainty. No wasted steps, no unnecessary gestures. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a leader. And leaders like him, they didn't leave survivors unless they were useful. The room responded to him without a word. The other terrorists straightened. Even the ones guarding the doors subtly adjusted their grips on their rifles. Nate saw it. Power. Unspoken, but absolute. The man's gaze swept the room, slow and measured, calculating. Then, he pointed at Ryan. You. Ryan stiffened. His crew flinched, but no one moved. The leader's head tilted slightly, not impatient, just waiting. Now, for the first time in his life, Ryan Carter hesitated. Nate caught it instantly. So did the terrorist. Ryan's breathing changed. A sharp inhale, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. His hands clenched, but the usual confidence wasn't there. Then, he started to move, and Nate grabbed his wrist, tight. Ryan's eyes flicked down, confused, angry. Nate's voice was barely above a whisper. You stand up now. You don't last an hour. Ryan didn't jerk his arm free. didn't fight, but Nate could feel it, the spike in his pulse, the silent war in his head. Then, Ryan exhaled, shallow, controlled, and he stayed down. The moment was set. Ryan Carter wasn't just a bully anymore. He was a man in need of answers, and whether he realized it or not, Nate Grayson was the only one who had them. The terrorist leader's gaze lingered on Ryan. Too long, too focused. Nate recognized that look. It wasn't about height or muscle. It was about potential. The man's eyes flicked over Ryan like he was weighing a weapon in his hands, looking for weaknesses, deciding if he was worth wielding. Ryan, he wasn't thinking like that. Not yet. He was still stuck, not moving, not breathing. Hands curled into fists, but not shaking, like an animal testing if the trap had already shut. Nate tightened his grip on Ryan's wrist, just enough to send a message. Don't move, don't react. Let me think. Ryan's jaw clenched. A bead of sweat slipped down his temple. His pulse jumped beneath Nate's fingers, but he didn't pull away. And that was the moment. For the first time in his life, Ryan Carter wasn't making the next move. He was waiting on someone else to decide it for him. And Nate, that's all he needed. Get up. The terrorist leader repeated the command, his tone sharper this time. Ryan didn't move. Nate inhaled slowly. If he didn't act now, Ryan was dead. Why him? Nate asked. The leader's head turned. Silence. Nate wasn't supposed to speak. That was the rule. He didn't care. Now the leader was studying him, like he was something new. Because I said so, the men replied. That wasn't an answer, and that meant the men didn't have one. He was testing them, just like Nate was testing him. You need something from him, right? Nate kept his voice steady, confident. Whatever it is, you'll get more from someone else. The leader raised a brow. That's so. Ryan's not your best option. Nate nodded toward the group. If it's manpower, his guys are stronger. If it's leverage, Marcus's family has reach. Ryan, he's just a bully, a blunt weapon. Ryan's jaw tensed. That hit deep. Good. The terrorist leader considered Nate. Then, he stepped closer, slow, deliberate. You like playing smart, don't you? His voice wasn't angry. It was amused. Dangerous. Nate didn't answer. The men crouched, leveling their gazes. The problem with smart people, he said, almost casual, is they think talking is the same as power. He paused, a slow smile forming on his lips. It's not. Then, he grabbed the back of Nate's head and slammed him forward. Pain exploded through Nate's skull as his forehead cracked against the floor. Hard. His vision blurred. A dull ringing filled his ears. A sharp exhale. Ryan tensed beside him, but he didn't move. Nate forced himself to breathe, forced himself to stay still. The leader straightened, looking down at him. Stay in your place, boy, he murmured. And with that, he moved on. Ryan's body stayed rigid, his breath slow as the leader walked past. Nate finally let go of his wrist. Ryan turned, stared at him. The moment stretched. Then, low, controlled. That's twice, Ryan muttered. You keep talking for me again, we're gonna have a problem. Nate exhaled, tasting blood. Would you rather be dead? Ryan didn't answer, but he didn't look away, either, because they both knew the truth, and that meant Ryan Carter was in the game now. A few hours later, the cafeteria was more crowded now. Too crowded. The terrorists had rounded up more students, forcing them inside. Some stumbled, their faces pale. Others clung to friends, whispering. A few were still crying, silent, exhausted sobs. The air was heavier, tighter. Then, the intercom crackled to life, a voice. Deep, steady, unshaken. Attention, students. A pause. Not rushed, measured, controlled. This is your new administration. Another pause. A hum of static filled the silence. Your school is now under our control. Nate felt the shift. Breathing changed. Shoulders stiffened. If you follow instructions, you will live. Someone whispered a prayer. If you resist, you will die. Silence. Nate felt it. The slow collapse of hope. Good. Because that meant they were ready to listen. And it was time for him to step in. Ryan leaned in, voice hushed but sharp. All right, genius. What now? He was masking it well, the tension in his voice, the uncertainty beneath the bravado. But Nate heard it. Felt it. Good. Nate exhaled. Slow. Calculated. He had pieces on the board now. Ryan. His crew. Maybe even Marcus, if he played it right. The terrorists thought they had control. But they made one mistake. They assumed no one in this school was thinking like them. They were wrong. Nate's lips curved into a smirk, because the game hadn't just begun. Then his pulse. The terrorists had established control. Or at least, they thought they had. Big mistake, because power wasn't just about who had the guns. It was about who understood the game. And Nate understood it better than anyone. His eyes flicked to Ryan, still tense, still resisting. But there, the hesitation. His fists weren't clenched as tightly. His gaze flicked to Nate for barely a second, quick, uncertain. A crack, small. But cracks always spread. Nate just had to make sure this one shattered. Fast, precise. Before the board reset, the terrorist leader stood near the entrance, gripping his radio like a weapon. His voice was low, firm, absolute. Every time he spoke, the others listened, snapping to attention, nodding without hesitation. Control. Undisputed. His second-in-command, a bearded man with a scar slicing down his cheek, stood nearby, scanning the room like a hawk. Not just watching, studying. Then, the leader's radio crackled. A voice on the other end. Urgent. His expression darkened. Without a word, he handed the radio to his second-in-command, then turned and strode toward the exit. The door shut behind him. Nate exhaled slowly. Now, the room had changed. Because the second-in-command, he was sharp, but he wasn't him. And that meant, there was a crack in the chain, but Nate wasn't watching him. He was watching the youngest one. Nervous hands, unsteady grip on his rifle, weight shifting from foot to foot. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked toward the second-in-command, not for orders, but for reassurance. He didn't belong here, and that meant, he was the weak link. Nate nudged Ryan's foot. Barely. Just enough to get his attention. Ryan's glare was instant, sharp, but Nate wasn't looking at him. Instead, he nodded subtly toward the young terrorist. Ryan followed his gaze. For a second, nothing. Then, a flicker of understanding. Shifted, just slightly. His eyes lingered on the trembling grip, the darting glances, and when he looked back at Nate, it wasn't anger anymore. It was something else, recognition. They had an opening. And for the first time, Ryan Carter saw it too. But knowing wasn't enough. Nate needed a plan. A way to test the waters. Watch this, he muttered under his breath. Ryan didn't reply, but he didn't stop him either. Progress. Nate turned to Marcus, out of his element in a way none of them were. The kind of guy who had always relied on money and status, neither of which meant anything here. Hey, Nate whispered. You scared? Marcus snapped his head toward him, eyes flashing. Are you? Of course, I'm scared, you idiot. Nate smirked. Perfect. Then act like it, he said. Louder. Marcus blinked. Froze. What? But then he saw it. The angle. The play. He hesitated, almost refused. Then, slowly, he nodded, and he played his part. He let out a shaky breath, made his voice tremble. I don't want to die, man. I don't want to die. Heads turned, including the young terrorists. His grip on his rifle shifted, just slightly. Nate saw it. Hook, set. Now, he just had to reel him in. The young terrorist shifted his weight. His grip on the rifle was too tight, fingers tense around the trigger. Trying to look in control, failing. Nate leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough. You don't want to be here, do you? The terrorist's eyes snapped to him. Sharp, defensive, but uncertain. That was the key. I don't know what they told you, Nate continued, steady, casual, deliberate. But you're in way over your head. It's not gonna end the way you think. The young man stiffened. A quick breath, a tell. Shut up, he muttered. Nate shrugged, unbothered. In control. I'm just saying. His gaze flicked to the gun, then back to the kid's face. You don't look like a killer to me. That did it. For a split second, just a flicker, there was doubt. A muscle twitched in the young man's jaw. His eyes darted, not at Nate, but toward the leader. Then, a sharp command. Focus. The older terrorist's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The young one flinched. He gripped his rifle tighter, forcing himself still. Back in line. Back under control. But Nate saw it. The hesitation. The second guessing. He wasn't fully theirs. Not anymore. Gunfire erupted in the distance. Closer. Screams followed. Panic. Chaos. The terrorists turned toward the hallway. Distracted. And in that moment, Nate moved. Fast. Precise. His fingers closed around a fork. Smooth metal, barely a weapon, unless you knew exactly where to use it. He drove it into the young terrorist's wrist, hard and fast, right between the tendons. A choked yell. The rifle dipped. Fingers spasmed. And that's all Ryan needed. He lunged, one brutal punch to the side of the kid's head. The terrorist staggered. Ryan didn't stop. A second punch, faster, harder. The kid's grip failed. The rifle slipped. Nate caught it before it hit the floor. Cold metal. Heavy. Loaded. He didn't hesitate. Safety off. Finger on the trigger. Ryan exhaled, fist still clenched, staring down at the unconscious terrorist. And just like that, the balance had shifted. But the fight wasn't over. Because now, they were out of time. Everything happened fast. The cafeteria erupted. Students gasped, some scrambling under tables. Others froze, wide-eyed, staring at the unconscious terrorist on the floor. The second-in-command's head snapped toward them. Then, to the missing rifle. Realization struck instantly. His gun whipped up, locking onto Nate and Ryan. Do you have any idea what you're doing? His voice was low. Sharp. Deadly. Drop the weapon, or you die where you stand. The air thickened. Ryan's muscles coiled, ready to lunge. But Nate was already moving. The rifle was his, steady, raised, aimed. Not today. Then, he pulled the trigger. Crack. The bullet ripped through the second-in-command's skull. A single, clean shot. Instant. Final. His body hit the floor hard, motionless. Dead before he even registered the kill. Silence slammed into the room. Heavy, suffocating. Nate didn't move. Didn't breathe. Rifle up, barrel steady, finger still on the trigger. Ryan exhaled, eyes locked on the lifeless body at their feet. And just like that, the fight had begun. The room was silent. Not empty silence, heavy silence, the kind that pressed down on your chest. Breathing, shuffling. A chair creaking as someone shifted too fast. The cafeteria, full of hostages, stunned. Watching. Ryan's crew, frozen, processing. Even Marcus, his usual confidence now edged with uncertainty. But most importantly, Ryan himself. He stared at Nate, not with hate, not with anger, with something raw, something unsettled. Because for the first time, he wasn't the strongest one in the room. Nate was, and that meant, he was in charge now. The cafeteria was dead silent. The second-in-command's body lay still, lifeless, a dark pool of blood spreading across the tile. The stolen rifle sat steady in Nate's hands. No tremor. No hesitation. Because this was control. But control was never permanent. In the hallway, movement. A faint shuffle of boots. More coming. He had seconds before the other terrorists realized something was wrong. Seconds to solidify his rule. His eyes flicked to Ryan. Waiting. Watching. Testing. Jaw tight. A muscle ticking in his cheek. His hands curled into fists, but this time, he wasn't clenching them in anger. He was measuring, weighing. And Nate. He was about to pass the test. Lock the doors, Nate ordered. Nobody moved. The hesitation hung in the air. Too many eyes flicking between him and Ryan, waiting for someone else to act. Nate's grip tightened on the rifle. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. Now. The room snapped into motion. Ryan's crew scrambled. Chairs screeched against the floor. Marcus rushed to shove tables against the entrance. And Ryan. He didn't move. He just watched. Measured. Weighed. Nate turned to him. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. You in or out? Ryan's jaw clenched. His knuckles were white. A heartbeat. Then, a nod. Small. Barely there. But it was enough. Ryan's crew saw it. And they moved. Because if Ryan was in, so were they. And just like that, Nate wasn't just holding a gun. He was holding power. They needed weapons. One gun wasn't enough. Nate pointed at the dead terrorist. Strip him. Now. Nobody moved. Marcus swallowed hard. What if they? Nate cut him off. If we don't arm ourselves, we're dead. You want to wait until they come back through that door. Silence. Then, movement. Ryan's crew hesitated, eyes flicking to the terrorist's lifeless body. Blood still pooled around him, staining the floor in thick, dark streaks. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was crossing a line. One by one, they forced themselves forward. Weapons first. Extra magazines. A knife. Anything they could use. Because fear was a powerful thing. And right now, they feared Nate more than the enemy. Not just because of the gun in his hands, but because he was willing to do what they couldn't. And that made him their leader. A radio crackled to life. A terrorist's voice, sharp, demanding. We heard gunfire. Report. The room froze. Ryan's grip tightened on his stolen rifle. Marcus's breath hitched. Even the students seemed to shrink into themselves. Nate grabbed the radio. Mind racing. If they knew a hostage had a gun, they'd storm in. End it before it started. He had to stall. His pulse hammered, but his voice, steady, low, controlled. He deepened his tone, mimicking the clipped precision of a soldier. Situation handled. Just a scuffle. Hostages scared. Silence. A single second stretched into eternity. Then, a reply. Copy that. Stand by. The radio went dead. The tension didn't. Nate exhaled slowly. They bought it. 4 now. But the clock was ticking. And soon, they'd come looking. Nate turned to Ryan. We need a real plan. Ryan didn't answer right away. His arms crossed, but not out of defiance, out of frustration. Tension. You're the genius, he muttered. Let's hear it. Nate's mind was already working. The terrorists had numbers, firepower, training, but they had one weakness. They thought they were in control. They thought fear was enough. They were wrong. Nate exhaled, his grip tightening on the rifle. This is our only shot, he said. We make it count. And just like that, the real fight began. The young terrorist, the one they'd taken down earlier, groaned. He was waking up. His breath came ragged, uneven. His fingers twitched against the blood-slicked floor. When he tried to move, a sharp wince flashed across his face. Nate knelt beside him. Calm. Calculated. Listen to me, he said. You're about to make a choice. The terrorist's eyes fluttered open. Unfocused. In pain. Nate leaned in. Lowered his voice. You help us, you live. A pause. A shift in his tone, colder now. You don't. He tilted his head toward Ryan. Ryan said nothing. He just stepped closer, gun in hand. Deliberate. Silent. Unflinching. The terrorist swallowed hard. You don't stand a chance, he whispered. Nate smirked. That's what your boss thinks too. He tapped the rifle lightly against the kid's leg. Just enough pressure to remind him. And that's why we're going to win. The young terrorist held out as long as he could. But fear broke people. His breathing was shaky, his eyes darting between Nate and Ryan. Looking for an out. Finding none. Nate leaned in, his voice calm. Measured. Your people don't care. If they did, they'd be here already. The terrorist swallowed. Didn't argue. Good. Nate's gaze stayed steady. Unshaken. Talk, he said. Or die knowing you were just another pawn. A pause. A flicker of hesitation. Then, he caved. It came in pieces. A stammered word here, a reluctant nod there. But Nate pried the details out of him. Terrorist positions. Weapons. Weak spots. The cafeteria had 3 possible escape routes. 2 were heavily guarded, but the third. The terrorists thought it was locked. It wasn't. And now, Nate had their way out. Nate turned to Ryan. Take Marcus and 3 guys. Slip out through the maintenance hall. Take out the terrorists guarding the cafeteria. Quietly. Ryan's brows furrowed. A flicker of doubt. His eyes shifted to Marcus, then back to Nate. And you? Nate's smirk was sharp. Calculated. I'll make sure they're looking the other way. Ryan stared at him, and for the first time, he looked impressed. Not just at the plan. At Nate. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about taking control, and never giving it back. Ryan and his crew moved fast. Low. Silent. Shadows slipping through the chaos. Nate didn't watch them go. Couldn't afford to. He grabbed the radio. Time to make noise. He pressed the button. Calm. Controlled. Hey, boss, he said, voice laced with amusement. You should probably get in here. The radio crackled. A beat of static. Then, the terrorist leader's voice. Sharp. Angry. Who is this? Nate grinned. He let the silence stretch, just long enough to sink in. Then, smooth as a blade. The guy you should have killed first. Few minutes later the doors slammed against the barricade. Metal clanged. Wood groaned. Chairs and tables scraped against the floor, straining under the force. But they held. Students flinched. Someone gasped. Then, a louder crash. The blockade buckled, then gave way. The terrorist leader stormed in. Gun raised. Rage in his eyes. But Nate, he didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Because this was the plan. The leader stalked forward, boots grinding against the floor. His men followed, weapons ready, but not ready enough. You think you're clever, kid, he snarled. Nate tilted his head. Clever enough. The leader's jaw tightened. He lifted his rifle. Barrel aimed. Last words. Nate smiled. Gunfire erupted from the hallway. Ryan's team, fully armed, fully ready. The leader's face twisted. His eyes flicked toward the sound, realization hitting too late. The trap snapped shut. And this time, Nate was the one in control. Chaos exploded. Ryan's team struck first. Gunfire ripped through the room. Shouts. The sharp clang of metal. The terrorists spun toward the sound, but too late. They were caught between 2 fronts. Trained or not, Ryan's group had the advantage, position, numbers, and surprise. Close-range shots. No time for cover. No time to regroup. They fell. Not instantly, not easily. Some managed to fire back. A few students dove for the ground, screaming. But Ryan's team kept moving. One by one, the terrorists dropped. Until only one remained. The leader. Cornered. Trapped. His chest rose and fell hard. His fingers twitched, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. Ryan raised his rifle, ready to end it. But Nate. He stepped forward. Wait. Ryan hesitated. What? Nate shook his head. Alive, he's leverage. Ryan's grip on the rifle tightened. His breath came sharp, calculating. Then, he lowered the gun, because now he understood. Nate wasn't just thinking about this fight. He was thinking 10 steps ahead. And that's why, in the end, Nate Grayson was going to win. The cafeteria was silent again. But this time, it wasn't fear holding the room still. It was something else, something heavier. Because now, Nate was in charge. Ryan's crew looked at him, waiting. Ready. Even Marcus, for once, no complaints. And Ryan, he didn't argue, didn't challenge it. His gaze swept the room, then landed on Nate. A slow nod. Your move, boss. Nate exhaled. Felt the weight of it. Then, he grinned. Because this was just the beginning. The cafeteria felt different now. The fear was still there, but it had changed. And no longer wild. No longer desperate. Now, it was waiting. Watching. And all of it. Focused on Nate. Even Ryan. Especially Ryan. The terrorist leader knelt on the floor, hands zip-tied behind his back. His breathing was steady, but his eyes, sharp, burning, gave him away. Fury. Defiance. Hatred. But no words. Because even he knew. The shift had happened. Ryan's crew wasn't just following orders anymore. They were waiting for Nate to lead. And he would. But first, he had to break the leader. Not just to win. To end this for good. Nate crouched in front of the terrorist leader. Calm. Unshaken. In control. You're going to tell me everything. The leader smirked. Sat a little straighter. Even with his hands tied, he tried to act like he still had power. And if I don't, he taunted. Nate's eyes flicked to Ryan. Ryan, who had no problem pulling the trigger. Nate leaned in, voice barely a whisper. You saw what we did to your men. His tone was almost conversational. You heard them scream. You watched them fall. The leader's jaw tightened. He wasn't stupid. Nate smiled. Here's the deal. You tell me what I need to know, and maybe, I keep you breathing. A beat of silence. Then, the leader laughed. A cold, hollow sound. You think you're in control, kid? Nate didn't blink. Didn't flinch. He just tilted his head. Look around, he said. Who's holding the gun? The laughter died in the leader's throat, because the answer wasn't him. And for the first time, he felt it. The shift. The loss. Nate owned this moment. The leader wasn't easy to break, but he wasn't invincible. Fear did things to a person, and Nate knew exactly how to use it. At first, the leader held out, jaw tight, breath controlled. But as the seconds dragged on, as the pressure squeezed, the cracks began to show. His breathing turned shallow, his hands clenched behind his back. And then, he talked. The gym. His voice was rough, reluctant. That's where the main force is. Nate's eyes narrowed. He waited. They set up a command post there. The leader's shoulders sagged slightly. They're waiting for extraction. Ryan shifted beside him. That wasn't the worst part. Because then the leader exhaled, voice dropping lower. They have hostages. Silence. More than just students, teachers, staff, security personnel. Nate's stomach tightened. Because his brother had to be among them. His fingers curled into a fist, nails pressing into his palm. For half a second, his vision blurred at the edges. Then, he exhaled. Steady, cold, focused. No time for emotions. Only strategy. Nate turned to Ryan. We're going after them. Ryan raised an eyebrow. You sure about that, boss? Nate didn't hesitate. Leaving them means we're just waiting to die. Ryan exhaled, then grinned. Then let's finish this. Just like that, Ryan was all in. Nate needed a real strike force. He scanned the room. Not everyone could fight. Some kids were paralyzed by fear, wide eyes, shaking hands, refusing to even look at him. They'd only slow them down. But Ryan's crew. Different story. He needed strength, strategy, nerves that wouldn't crack under pressure. Marcus, fast, smart, underestimated. Damon, a brawler, stronger than he looked. Tyler, quick reflexes, a fighter when it counted. Luke, athletic, good under pressure. Brandon, built like a tank, could take a hit and give one back. And Ryan, always Ryan. 6 fighters, 6 chances to win. Nate exhaled. Felt the weight of it, the risk, the moment. Then his gaze lifted, because this wasn't just about fighting back. This was about taking everything, and he wasn't planning to lose. The hallway was eerily quiet, too quiet. Every step echoed against the walls. The air was thick with silence, heavy with tension. Nate led the way, weapon in hand. Behind him, his team followed. Ryan, Marcus, Jason, Damon, Tyler, all watching him, all waiting for his next move. He wasn't the biggest, not the strongest, but strength wasn't just muscle. It was who had control. And right now, every step they took proved he did. They reached the gym's entrance. A guard stood outside, rifle in hand, posture rigid, focused, but not focused enough. He shifted his weight, checked his watch. Routine. Relaxed just a second too long. He never saw Ryan creeping up behind him. Never realized his mistake until, crack. Ryan's arm snapped tight around his neck. A sharp twist. The guard let out a choked gasp, then went limp. Silent. Efficient. Ryan eased the body to the floor. No hesitation. No remorse. Nate met his gaze. Ryan just wiped his hands on his shirt and smirked. Told you I could be useful. Inside the gym, chaos. Terrorists barked orders. Hostages stood against the wall, backs pressed flat, hands visible. No one dared to turn. Fear thickened the air. Nate's stomach tightened. His eyes scanned the room, then stopped. his brother. His posture was rigid, hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wasn't shaking, but Nate saw it, the tension, the fear barely held in check. Good. He needed him scared, because that meant he'd listen. One of the terrorists turned, spotted them. His gun started to rise. Nate didn't think, didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The fight was fast, brutal. Ryan's crew pushed forward, guns blazing. Gunfire ripped through the gym. Muzzle flashes lit up the chaos. Hostages screamed. Bullets slammed into walls. One terrorist dropped instantly. Another scrambled for cover, firing blindly. Nate moved without thinking. A shadow lunged at him, a flash of movement, a glint of steel, a knife. Nate twisted, barely. The blade sliced through air, missing his ribs by inches. He ducked, rolled. The terrorist spun, ready to strike again. Gunfire. A single, deafening shot. The terrorist collapsed mid-step. Nate looked up. Ryan stood there, rifle still raised. Grinning. Got your back, boss. Nate exhaled. And just like that, the fight was over. But the war, that was just beginning. The last terrorist stood alone, gun raised. Desperate. Breathing hard. Sweat dripped down his temple. His eyes flicked left, right, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Ryan stepped forward, gun aimed. Finger tight on the trigger. Let's end this, he muttered. But Nate. He held up a hand. Drop it, he ordered. The terrorist's hands shook. His chest rose and fell too fast. He looked at Ryan. At the bodies on the floor. Then, at Nate. A flicker of realization. This was over. His fingers uncurled. The gun hit the floor with a dull clatter. He swallowed hard. Then, he dropped to his knees, because now, even the enemy bowed to Nate Grayson. The hostages were safe. The terrorists, defeated. Bound. Powerless. And the students, they weren't looking at Ryan anymore. They were looking at Nate. Some with relief, some with awe, some with fear, because they all knew the truth. Ryan was strong, but Nate was a leader. Ryan felt it too. The shift. The weight of it. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders, like he was shaking off the loss. But he didn't argue, because this was Nate's moment. And now, this school belonged to him. For now, because power never stops at just one place. Ryan clapped Nate on the back. A solid hit, a sign of respect. Not bad, genius. Nate smirked. Not bad yourself. Ryan's grin widened, but something else flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Understanding. Guess I work for you now. Nate didn't argue. He just met Ryan's gaze. Steady. Certain. Because the truth. Ryan wasn't wrong. And this was only the beginning. The gym was silent, not peaceful, heavy, unsettling. Blood smeared the floor. The hostages whispered, their voices hushed, uncertain, nervous, because the fight was over, but the real battle was just beginning. Nate exhaled, scanning the room. Not at the bodies, not at the wreckage, at the people, at the way the students looked at him now. Not just with relief, with fear, with questions. This couldn't get out. Not like this. If word spread that a group of students took down trained terrorists, the fallout would be immediate. The school board would step in. Too many failures, too many questions. They'd shut the place down. The police would launch an investigation. People would demand to know why students, not professionals, handled the crisis. The government would silence it. If an elite academy failed this badly, they'd do whatever it took to cover it up. And once that started, it wouldn't stop. This wasn't just about the fight. This was about the aftermath. Nate's jaw tightened. He needed to control the story before anyone else did. He turned to Dr. Calloway, the school's head administrator. We need to talk. Now. After meeting with the school administrator and the head of security, the plan was set. Ryan leaned against a toppled bench, wiping blood from his knuckles. All right, boss, he said, grinning. What's next? Nate exhaled, measuring his words. We erase what happened here, he said. Ryan's grin vanished. What? We let the school security take credit. Silence. Then Ryan let out a sharp breath. Not amusement, disbelief. You want us to pretend the same security team that got overpowered in minutes suddenly saved the day? Nate didn't flinch. If we don't, the school goes down, he said, voice steady, sharp. You really think they'll let this story get out? That kid's handled terrorists better than trained professionals. Ryan's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists. He wasn't stupid, but he was prideful. And what do we get out of this? Ryan challenged. Nate smirked. We get control. A beat of silence. Then, understanding flickered in Ryan's eyes. Because this wasn't about recognition. This was about power. The gym was silent. The students who had seen everything stood in small groups, some shaking, some gripping each other's arms, some refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Waiting for someone to tell them what came next. Dr. Calloway stepped forward. Her usual strict demeanor was gone, replaced with exhaustion, a sharp edge of urgency. Her voice was steady, but there was no room for argument. Listen carefully. The students stiffened. Heads lifted. Attention locked in. What happened here today does not leave this school, she said. For your safety. For the school's survival. For all of us. A few murmurs. Some hesitation. But no outright refusal. Ryan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Frustrated. Restless. So what? We just pretend security handled this. Dr. Calloway's gaze didn't waver. That's exactly what we do. Silence. Nate scanned the room, watching, not interfering. He didn't need to say anything. They already understood. Because the truth, it wouldn't save them. It would destroy them. One by one, the nods came. Because fear was a powerful motivator. And right now, Dr. Calloway had given them an order. But Nate had given them a choice. And they chose survival. 7 minutes later, the gym was in motion. The terrorists, defeated, disarmed, bound on the floor. The hostages, shaken but unharmed. The security team moved efficiently, securing the area, checking on hostages, assessing injuries, re-establishing control. Orders were given. Protocols were followed. It looked exactly the way it was meant to. Ryan exhaled sharply. His hands curled into fists, but he stayed silent. He hated this, hated watching them take credit, but the plan was already in motion, and Nate had already won. The security team worked efficiently. Terrorists were zip-tied. Hostages were checked over. Procedures, protocol. The lead guard turned to Dr. Calloway. We'll need statements from all staff and students involved. She nodded sharply. Of course. Nate stood at a distance, watching, waiting. The script had been written. Now, they just had to stick to it. Ryan shifted beside him, muttering under his breath. This is insane. Nate tilted his head. You still don't get it, do you? Ryan's eyes snapped to him. Enlighten me, genius. Nate's voice was quiet, controlled. This isn't about what happened. He glanced at the security chief giving orders like he had planned this himself. It's about who controls the story. Ryan exhaled hard. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Because deep down, he knew Nate was right. And just like that, the lie became the truth. An hour later, the school was a war zone of flashing lights and moving bodies. Helicopters thundered overhead. Police swarmed the halls. Paramedics checked on students. Reporters shoved microphones into the faces of anyone who looked willing to talk. The world wanted answers. And they got one. A statement from the head of school security. Our trained personnel neutralized the threat. Thanks to their bravery, the students are safe. Ryan threw a chair. It clattered against the floor, making a few students jump. Unbelievable, he muttered, pacing like a caged animal. They were hiding in their offices, and now they're heroes. Nate. He just smiled. He sat back, arms crossed, watching the news footage roll. Because now, he had everything he wanted. The truth didn't matter. Control did. And he owned it. Ryan kicked the door open. It slammed against the wall, rattling the windows. Nate didn't flinch. He sat alone at a desk, hands folded, waiting, watching. Ryan paced, breathing hard, fists clenched. Tell me you're joking, he growled. They're taking credit for everything. And we're just supposed to sit here and let them. Nate didn't even blink. Yes, Ryan stopped, stared. Then, he laughed. Not a happy laugh. A sharp, dangerous one. You're a real piece of work, genius. Nate tilted his head, smirking. And yet, you're still here. Ryan's jaw tightened. Because Nate was right. After everything, he was still here, still following. Because deep down, he knew Nate wasn't thinking about today. He was thinking about what came next. And Ryan wasn't about to get left behind. The real story of what happened that day, only a handful knew. The students in the cafeteria, the ones who fought. The people Nate had under his control. And every single one of them kept their mouths shut. Because they understood something now. The truth didn't matter. The outside world only saw what Nate allowed them to see. News headlines praised the security team. The school issued carefully worded statements. Even the survivors, shaken, changed, repeated the lie. Because speaking out meant challenging Nate. And no one was willing to do that. Not anymore. And just like that, Nathaniel Grayson didn't just survive the attack. He became something bigger. That night, Nate sat in his bedroom. The lights were off. The city skyline flickered outside his window. For the first time all day, he was alone. His phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. So what's next, boss? Nate exhaled, running a thumb over the screen. Ryan wasn't questioning him anymore. He was waiting. Nate smirked. He typed back, we build. And this time, no one would stop them.